Okay, guys, let's start. So I just wanted to start by acknowledging that UBC lies within the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. And I'd also like to, thank you, welcome everyone to the DMCBH Open Science Initiative Town Hall. So the purpose of this town hall is to educate the DMCBH members on the Open Science Initiative that's being led by TOSI, or the Tannenbaum Open Science Initiative. So the Neuro and the Douglas Hospital, which is affiliated with McGill University, and the Hotchkiss Institute, which is affiliated with University of Calgary, have all committed to open neuroscience. And so we're here today to explore whether DMCBH should also join them and also be part of this open science initiative. Just wanted to say that Lynn and I fully support, this exploration of this initiative led by Paul, Pavlidis, and Judy, and the rest of the neuroinformatics working group. There is a financial reason to join this group. There is also an incentive to have a platform for developing databases for the research arm of the biobank, as well as some of the different projects that are going on, some imaging projects that are going on with the FIPKey and the NINC as well. So there are a lot of positives with joining this open science initiative. There are some limitations as well, and that's why we're not just kind of going full force. And that's why the working group is actually exploring whether the pros and the cons of this open science initiative. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Paul Pavlidis, who is the chair of the DMCBH Neuroinformatics Working Group.
Thank you very much, Sharnaz, and thanks for those attending, either in person or by Zoom. So yeah, as Sharnaz mentioned, I sit on the Center Executive Committee because I'm the head of the working group in neuroinformatics. And last year, when we first formed, we did a survey to see what were things that we should be focusing on. And one of the things emerged was the importance of open science, and the degree to which it's being embraced internationally, and of course in Canada. So, for example, in a poll that we conducted here, some of you may have answered that poll. 70% of the respondents said that they thought that open science should be an important part of should be an important principle of the Center for Brain Health. So for that reason, and actually, how do I advance the slide now? Oh, here, I guess, is this a touch screen? No, that's not. Oh, is it over here? No. Oh yeah, here we go, okay. Yeah, so this is just some excerpts from the strategic plan that was adopted by the center last year. And so one of the pillars is transparency and accountability. So commitment to openness for neuroinformatics in particular is highlighted in the strategic plan. Supporting researchers for open data sharing and analyzing data, and also developing infrastructure for initiatives to promote open science and data sharing. So it obviously, like I mentioned, it goes beyond just our walls, and that Canada, this is from the Ministry of Science, has put out a overarching goal of making Canadian science open to all to increase its impact. And even internationally is one example of an international effort. So the United Nations, through its UNESCO arm, put out just a few days ago this recommendation that specifically says that countries part of the United Nations should be developing plans to make open science a bigger priority. So why are we doing this though right now with TOSI? So about 5 years ago, I heard that the Neurological Institute at McGill was becoming an open science institute under Guy Rouleau's leadership. And I was really excited about this innovative idea and whether it was something we could apply locally. So it turned out it wasn't quite the right time to do that. I had sent out some feelers and just the temperature wasn't quite right. But now we're able to announce the support with the support of the Tannenbaum Open Science Institute and local matching funds and having the right team together, we're able to conduct this now what's called a buy-in process to explore whether we can follow suit. So the team involved, besides the neuroinformatics working group at large and myself, so Jeff LeDue is very important in doing project management and a lot of the on-the-ground work to make some of this happen. Tim Murphy has been also very supportive, and we're able to get matching funds partly through the Dynamic Brain Circuits Cluster. And then Judy Illes, who is collaborating with us on investigating the impact and attitudes towards intellectual property. So at this point, I know that a lot of people are going to have questions, which I'm not going to be able to answer right now, about what open science is, what this what process is about, what adopting an open science institute would mean for us. So the purpose of this town hall is to start to answer some of those questions and to start the conversations that we need to have with all of our stakeholders about whether this is something we should do and what exactly it would look like. So this morning, we're going to focus on sharing information with you first. So starting with a presentation from Dr. Guy Rouleau, who I'll introduce in just a minute, and then from our local teams to describe some of the more specific activities that we're going to be conducting to constitute the buy-in project. And the timing of this, the pacing today is that we're hoping to have a pretty good amount of time for questions and discussion. And I'm going to actually ask that during, after our presentations, that you hold your questions just so that we can keep everything on time. And at the end, you can bring those back up and we'll see who's most suited to answer them among us. So with that, I'll introduce Dr. Guy Rouleau. So Dr. Rouleau is well known to many of us as a distinguished researcher in neurogenetics who's made many contributions to understanding of brain diseases. And as director of the Neuro at McGill, a post he's held since 2013. He's also chair of the Department of Neurology and Neurosurgery, director of the Department of Neuroscience at the University Health Center, and maybe most relevant for today, the co-founder of the Tannenbaum Open Science Institute. Dr. Rouleau has won many awards and distinctions for his research and leadership, including Officer of the Order of Canada, National Order of Quebec, and the Gardner-Whiteman Award. As one of Canada's most influential neuroscientists, Dr. Rouleau's pioneering move into open science advocacy has had a really dramatic effect on a lot of people. In 2016, by declaring the Neuro and Open Science Institute the first in the world, he set up the model which we're here to discuss today. So today he's going to give us some of the context and background on how and why the Neuro reached this point and the impact it's had over the last 5 years. And I think this is all really important information for us to listen to as we head into our own consultation process. And I'm really looking forward to your presentation, Guy. So Guy, you should be able to share your screen.
Okay, good. So all is good. So thank you very much for inviting me. I would very much like to have been there in person. Vancouver, a beautiful place, and UBC is a wonderful university and lots of colleagues and friends. So I'm going to talk about becoming an open science institute, the why and the how. So just for the setting the stage, you heard about the UNESCO. Essentially, open science is to accelerate discovery, and we think to deliver cures more quickly. Open science is the idea that scientific knowledge of all kinds should be openly shared as early as practical in the discovery process. So you mentioned, what's open science. In fact, it's true that open science means different things to different people. So one of the first things we did at the Neuro was we tried to define what open science was for us at the Neuro. So what are the motivations for adopting open science? So this plaque is outside the entrance of the Neuro, and it basically, everybody who comes in a building sees it. And was our mission when it was founded in 1934, the Neuro, and it remains our mission, dedicated to relief of sickness and pain and the study of neurology. It's maybe an old statement, but it's still a reality. So to accomplish this mission, we have to adapt to new reality. So the situation in 1934 is very different than today. So the new reality in the 21st century is that there is the capacity to share our knowledge and discoveries early, widely, and openly. And this is basically a consequence of the internet and of the informatics revolution that we've had. So the kind of open sharing and massive collaboration basically brings the world together, and we think will accelerate discovery. And I think it sort of makes sense. So there are some nice lines here, like it takes a world to understand the brain. And so this is how we ended up by being motivated to adopt open science. Because in fact, what happens is that, as neurologists, we're really not doing a great job from the point of view of finding new treatments for a lot of brain diseases. And that's not because neuroscientists are not smart and doing great work. It's that the brain is very complicated. So at the Neuro, it's not like I woke up one morning and said, let's be open. We had a discussion and we thought that we should see if we could have a buy-in of the people within the Neuro to be able to have everybody be in agreement to adopt open science. And so you can find there's a white paper that describes our buy-in process, which is on the website Gates Open Research. And essentially, working with Richard Gold from the law school, we spent 18 months basically doing seminars like what I'm doing now, inviting speakers, having focus groups, doing social studies, see what people were worried about, what were what were possible problems with adopting open science, what were the attitudes of people. We discussed it at retreats, and at the end of this 18-month buying process, we were at a retreat and we had a discussion about open science, and then we basically said we need now to see, do we want to adopt these open science principles? And the adoption was unanimous, and I would say unanimous, but not everybody was convinced that this was the right thing to do. Well, I shouldn't say that. I think pretty well everybody thought it was the right thing to do, but some people thought that maybe it would be disruptive or problematic. There was a lot of unknowns. This kind of inspired Larry Tannenbaum, who was on our advisory board at the time. He basically, most lay people think that science is already open. And he thought that this was a very good idea, and so he gave us a $20 million donation from the Larry and Judy Tannenbaum Family Foundation, and this donation was essentially to advance open science. And TOSI has two missions. One mission is to implement open science at the Neuro. In other words, to say you're open doesn't mean everything is open. It takes time, it takes work, and it takes money. And so it was to develop the informatics, to develop the infrastructure, to develop different kinds of projects. And the second aim was to encourage other Canadian neuroscience research institutes to commit to open science. So to that end, we have the Hotchkiss, who has adopted open science principles, as you'll see later, and so has the Douglas Research Institute, which is a McGill affiliated hospital. So if we go to the next slide. So what are our neuroscience guiding principles? Basically, the principles are to enable our mission to accelerate the rate of discovery and the creation or finding of new treatments. So it really boils down to, we're committed to openly sharing all our research outputs. So that means data, that means transgenic animals, that means antibodies, that means reagents, it means everything. Openly as soon as there is a publication of paper. Earlier, if people want, but anyhow, at least by the time of publication. And that whether we generate it alone or in partnership with others, we want it also to be open. So in other words, we want to have collaborations where the outputs of those collaborations with other institutions, other individuals would be open. These are the open research partnerships. And then we want to establish platforms to share patient and participant contributions. So We're a research institute and a hospital, and so we have access to a lot of patients and patient materials. So this, of course, has to be done in a way that is ethically acceptable. And then we wanted open science compatible intellectual property. So what this essentially means is that we do not want intellectual property that prevents sharing of data or information, or leads to hiding things or delaying publication. And I have lots of stories about that. And it doesn't mean that we're against patents eventually by others. It doesn't mean that we're against things like copyrights. We are for copyrights, but it needs to be openly shared. And the last principle is actually very simple: is that there's researcher and patient autonomy. So if a researcher decides that he or she does not want to follow these principles and wants to patent something and develop something, they're free to do so. We don't help them, and we don't hinder them, and we don't want anything out of it. So if they make tons of money, we don't want to share. It's completely separate from us. Okay. So what are our neuroscience open platforms? Well, essentially the first one I want to talk about is the one which is we call the Clinical Biospecimen Imaging and Genetics Repository, CBIG. It's a bit of a play on the word to see big, and of course we do see big. So to date, there have been almost 2,000 donors and lots of different kind of biospecimens, white blood cells, serum, DNA, CSF, fibroblast, plasma, tissue in some who have neurosurgery, ultimately the brains and spinal cords in those who die and who've agreed to provide this material. Also, many iPSC lines, all freely available, and imaging data on many things, including 1,000 Parkinson's patients. So these partnerships that we develop with anybody are in the open. We have what we call the Early Drug Discovery Unit. And the Early Drug Discovery Unit is essentially to generate and derive iPSC lines, either from the patient, yes, always, but sometimes if there's a mutation, we would correct the mutation to have isogenic lines that are CRISPR corrected. We engage in open partnerships with industry and with whoever wants to collaborate with us. And these open partnerships mean that industry gives us the money, but the data that's generated is freely available. Okay? Why does industry want to do that? Well, because they're interested in having access to our material, access to the expertise. And what they want is the development of high quality assays and the generation of data. There's access, all the protocols are available, send lines are available, software is available, and there is a portal to be able to see what we have in our CBIG repository. And you can request the material if you wish. Okay. So, open science is. Hold on, I'm just checking something. Perfect. Okay. Okay. So, as a core part of the open science philosophy is that we need to use and reuse shared resources and information. And as software engineer would put it, good programmers write code, great programmers reuse other people's code, because there's a lot of information and a lot of materials out there. So for us, it means designing platforms where we have to, like for sharing sensitive data, using and aligning with existing platforms when we can. Another resource is our Open Science Grassroots Initiative Committee. So one thing we discovered is that the young researchers, those who had been recruited, in the 5-10 years previously, were already believers in open science. And so we wanted to tap their expertise and their energy, and we created what we call the Grassroots Initiative Committee. And it basically comes up with very innovative ideas that we then adopt or try to adopt if it's possible. So another important element is rewards and incentive. So we've got this, the Neuro Irv and Helga Cooper Foundation Open Science Prize, which we was awarded like 2 weeks ago for open science initiatives and open science initiatives or projects. There's a Hatrock Award for open methods, and there's Neuro Community Open Science Initiatives funding. So those are the kinds of initiatives that we do. So this is the TOSI type 2, the TOSI 2. So this is where we want to support and partnership TOSI with other facilities so that they could uptake open science. And so we create seed projects where we collaboratively build open science capacity, either by exporting an open science solution created at the Neuro or co-developing a new capacity. Through the buy-in projects, we provide funding to enable other institutions to hire people dedicated to designing an institutional open science approach and consult with stakeholders. This is what's going on here now. And the ongoing support of our Open Science Alliance Officer, who is involved in all these various institutions and helping them to, frame the questions and find their own answers. Once an institute has designed a set of open science principles, they are then submitted to TOSI and approved. And if approved, then there's annual funding to be able to maintain open science activity. These are the partnerships that are here. Okay. So open science and intellectual property. This is the biggest sticking point of our approach to open science. And it's really it's patents. It's people do not want to let go, or a lot of people do not want to let go of the possibility of making patents. But the fact of the matter is, there's no single approach. This is our approach, is no patents, but other approaches can also be good. There can be other kinds of restrictions that can be put in place. The important thing is the open sharing of research outputs. So anyone who wants to seriously engage in open science has to find some way of dealing with this tension. For the most part, from our perspective, IP doesn't really matter very much. Why? Most researchers aren't interested, and most research done at the Neuro is very early stage basic science. And so patents are not very valuable, and patents are sometimes even harmful. And so we looked at the last 15 companies spun out of the Neuro. And in fact, out of those 15, one, you had a patent that was continued, which was continued to be developed. 14 were know-how companies. So that's not showing a great importance of patents in the outputs or in the commercial activities that come out of the Neuro. And in fact, that project, that patent that was continued, to the various stages, ultimately was useless for the company. So I think the work that we do at the Neuro, and maybe you do as well, is more early stage than late stage. And so intellectual property or patents are not appropriate at that stage. So IP can slow down research, and I can give you examples later on. Another thing that came from our internal analysis is that while patents rarely lead to actual products or services, they actually cost a lot of money. So I remember sitting at a meeting of the Office of Technology Transfer and the VPR, and the Office of Technology Transfer, which handles all the patents all at the university, was kind of lamenting that it cost more money to maintain the patents than the money that was generated by all the licenses that they had. And so the conclusion was that they had to patent more aggressively, but I don't think that's going to work. I think that patenting is not the core business of a university or of a hospital research institute. And then finally, there are some very interesting new commercialization models that don't require restrictive intellectual property. So we had our neuroscience in Action Symposium last week, and we heard at least a half a dozen examples of international consortia, companies, nonprofits, charities that are pushing right into the commercialization domain without any patents at all. And so this dovetails nicely with what we've done at the Neuro, which is that patents filed at McGill are either irrelevant or get dropped. So if you want to learn more about the neurosciences, the Neuro's approach to IP, I can put you in touch with our Open Science Alliance officer, who in these days of COVID is actually living in Vancouver. So I'm sure he would be quite available. So despite our conviction that most of the time IP at academic institutes is usually not very useful or harmful, we realize that each institute needs to make their own path. So we have wording that we use, but not everybody has to have the exact same wording. So the core criteria is that an institute wants to commit to open science. It needs to design an approach that seriously and meaningfully speaks to the conflict between, on the one hand, sharing research outputs in a way that allows others to access and use them with minimum barriers. And on the other, the ways IP exists specifically to restrict others from accessing or using research outputs. So there are two currently approved TOSI institutes that have designed their own approach. The HBI, the Hotchkiss Brain Institute, limits the application of its IP principles to the activities directly supported by the institute itself. And so the wording is, the institute will ensure intellectual property and patent concerns do not hinder the HBI's open science principles, and any HBI research team or platform supported by the HBI will endeavor to support open science principles insofar as their activities are supported by HBI. And the Douglas Research Institute has taken a slightly different, more multi-pronged approach, and their commitment is to minimize the impact of IP. They do this through ensuring the use of open licenses on research outputs as often as possible, providing full institutional support for researchers choosing to forego IP and adopt open science compatible commercialization pathways. And when considering restrictive IP, they commit to doing so in a transparent way and to justify it with reference to institutional mission to maximize the impact of discoveries and innovations on the prevention and treatment of mental health disorders. So, essentially, this is probably going to be the most discussed issue. Hopefully, maybe it won't be, but this is our experience. So this is what I just talked about, sorry. The different approaches, the Neuro, the Hotchkiss, and the Douglas. Okay. So what's been the impact since we adopted open science? Well, we've had increased funding and philanthropic support. We've gotten FACS grants, which are provincial grants, Erg and Helga Foundation, and we could insert all kinds of philanthropic support. We're raising now somewhere around $25 million a year, and 7 years ago, we were raising like $4 million a year. And a lot of it is related to open science. It's something that really the donors like. We have leadership in growing national and international movements. UNESCO, you heard about earlier, we were involved with UNESCO in their declaration, and also involved in the federal roadmap that was put out by Mona Niebuhr, the scientist-in-chief of Canada. And we have new initiatives and partnerships with industry. There's the Neurogenomics Partnership, which is with currently Roche and Takeda, but there are other companies that are going to come on board. iCaros, which is an antibody validation company, if you wish. I mean, it's a nonprofit company. It's actually quite interesting because this is run by the person who was the most skeptical about open science. And I think he's raised like $6 million for this, and is needing a lot of space. So he's actually become one of our strongest open science proponents. And as I mentioned, Takeda, Roche, and Illumina are involved in the neurogenomics partnerships. And the other thing is we're very competitive for attracting young researchers. So one of the things that people worried about was that open science would be bad for young researchers. In fact, that's not the case. Young researchers are very pro open science. That's my experience. And there are some that chose to come to the Neuro because of the open science principles. So I am done. I'm going to stop sharing screen, and I'm certainly open, or whatever. We're all open to questions. Maybe it'll be Paul who fields things, I guess.
Thank you, Guy. Thanks very much. I need to get the slides back. Okay, so I'm just going to now give a little bit of an overview of the buy-in project that we're doing, and then we'll hear from Jeff and Judy to fill in some of the details. So as I mentioned, the genesis of our project was driven by the international open science movement and the identification of this as a strategic priority for the center, and the fact that the TOSI was actively working to have the model taken up by other neuroscience centers in Canada. And so I mentioned this, but we're very grateful for the support of TOSI, and as well as the matching funds that we have from the center, from the Dynamic Brains Circuits Cluster led by Tim Murphy, and the International Neuroethics Patent Initiative, which is a project led by Judy Illes, at least the Canadian component. So another component of the Open Science Initiative, besides our buy-in project that I want to mention, is VBrain, which is led by Professor Sophia Frangu. And this is sort of an analog of some of, perhaps, of what Guy presented with CBIG, that we want to have an in-house data platform for data management, analysis, and data sharing. This is initially focused on neuroimaging data, but the idea is that it would be something bigger and broader than that. And that's being conducted with support from the Faculty of Medicine. And recently, also, it looks like we're going to be having some support from TOSI as well. So the work on VBrain is just ramping up now, and we'll hear more about it, I'm sure, in the near future from Sophia. And we're going to be working very closely with VBrain as part of our initiative as well. So as Guy described, the model has 5 principles, and this is another version of them that I took from a paper that Guy co-authored to explain the Neuro's Open Science Initiative back in 2017. And so some version of these principles have to be adopted to become a TOSI-approved Open Science Institute. And that approval, the idea is that comes with a financial commitment, which I understand is through the Tannenbaum Family Foundation to help support open science here. So, for example, the Hotchkiss, when they declared, I have that on the next slide, that that they announced a $2 million donation that was partly from the Tannenbaum, partly from another donor to support their initiative going forward. So even though those 5 principles are ones that we want to center our discussion on, what we decide it means to be an open science institute, or some steps along the way towards that, are up to us to decide. That we're not committing to becoming an open science institute with this project. It's to find out if we are going to buy into that. And so we get to determine that for ourselves. So having other institutions that are at various stages along the way with this is a big help for us. And so we're going to be actively engaging with all of the, so the Western is up here because they, at just around the same time as us, are also starting their own buy-in process. The Douglas just completed theirs and is going to be announcing that they're becoming an Open Science Institute. And the Hotchkiss just announced it just a couple of weeks ago. So the buying process, like I said, is really just designed to educate our stakeholders and to flesh out and address questions and concerns. And then whatever consensus we reach about going forward, that we have to develop an implementation plan. So this means developing our own version of the 5 principles, working with our stakeholders and partners to develop data and resource governance frameworks in support of the principles. So for example, the biobank here and vBrain, as well as for individual researchers, and a plan for sustainability. So on this slide, I'm just outlining the high-level activities that we'll be undertaking over the coming year, and just briefly explain them a little bit before handing it over to Jeff and Judy to go into a little bit more detail. So first of all, one of the major components is engaging with the stakeholders. So besides this town hall, we're going to be planning a series of seminars. So we can kind of count Guy's presentation as one of those, but we want to have several more. I think, like Guy mentioned, that intellectual property and commercialization is a big question. So we're going to be certain to have at least one seminar that focuses on that. Besides providing information, we're going to be actively seeking your input. So Jeff and his team are going to be conducting surveys to determine current levels of engagement with open science, attitudes and opinions, and the needs that people have for moving towards open. And so we're putting effort into enhancing mechanisms like the Databinge to actively assist our researchers in making data open over the coming year. And so Jeff will tell you more about that in a minute. And then because of the importance of intellectual property considerations, I think Guy is right that that's likely to be one of the big issues that we end up discussing. Judy Illes and her team are conducting a research study of attitudes and impacts of protected intellectual property in the center. And she's already held a number of focus groups towards this. Maybe some of you participated in those, and she's going to tell us more about that after Jeff. So in the second half of the year, or towards the second half of the year, with all this information and input that we're going to be collecting, we're going to begin formulating a more concrete plan for what our open science initiative might look like long term. So this is going to be informing and seeking the input of leadership at the department, faculty, and university levels, the development of governance plans and policies, leading to our specification of the 5 principles. And the final stages, again, if we get this far, would be to seek formal adoption of the principles and become a TOSI approved center. So that's most of what I wanted to say. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jeff to tell you a little bit more about the activities he's leading, and then we'll hear from Judy, and then we'll have time for questions.
Okay, hello everyone. So my name is Jeffrey LeDue. I'm responsible for the DMCBH's NINC core facility, and I help Professor Murphy with the dynamic brain circuits cluster. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to tell you about our plans for some of the activities that Paul mentioned. So this is going to be centered around an activity that we've been running for over 5 years now. It's called Databinge. It's a meeting that we started to build community in the center. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you can check out the story that Vanessa put on the CBH's website to celebrate Databinge's 5th anniversary. So the Databinge team, I'm referring to myself, I'm referring to our undergraduate co-op students, our graduate student peer tutors, Prof. Murphy. We're going to be mainly engaging in activities 2 and 4 from the proposal that we submitted to TOSI. So activity 2 is the assessments, surveys, and town halls that Paul mentioned, and activity 4 is the open research training and facilitation. So in terms of the survey, we're developing a survey to give the opportunity for everyone to give us feedback, students, staff, faculty, on their thoughts and attitudes towards open science. We're going to aim for something that takes less than 20 minutes to fill out. We will incorporate some modules from the Center for Open Sciences, Open Scholarship Survey, which captures people's attitudes, behaviors, and perceived norms with respect to open science practices. We'll add in a DMCBH centric module to try and get everyone's perspective on what this Open Science Institute designation might mean for us. And we're looking to put this in people's hands in the middle of January next year. In terms of the assessments, so we're going to model these on some assessments that we conducted in 2019 while we were developing the Brain Circuits Cluster data management and data sharing white paper. These are really going to be just conversations with key lab personnel to try and understand what people's current practices are and identify any gaps that we can readily address in the short term, possibly using things that are described in our white paper. So these will be ongoing throughout 2022 while we work through our Open Science Initiative. And so that brings us to activity 4, open research training and facilitation. So our Databinge meeting is going to serve as the forum to assist labs in addressing the gaps that we might discover in activity 2. We're going to be there to help labs make their resources open and to help them locate and access data sets that might be relevant for their own active projects. So this will be ongoing throughout the initiative, all of 2022. So that's all for me. I'll turn it back over to Paul.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, so next up is Judy Illes. So Judy is, I'm sure everyone knows, is an internationally recognized scholar in neuroethics and really one of the people who shaped that whole field. So it was really exciting to find out that she was interested in the intellectual property angle of our project, and fortuitously had a grant that was on this topic, and we were able to leverage that as matching funds. So she's going to tell you about her component. Thanks, Judy.
All right, thanks. Hi, everyone. So I'll be very quick just to share with you where we are on this project so far. It is the CBH component is part of a multi-layered national and international effort that I'll talk about in just a second. We have 3 objectives that embody all the 3 layers of the project. It's really to explore perspectives on neuroscience patents and IP and open neuroscience, and how these intersect and how we can find, I'm going to say, sweet spots as needed in this endeavor. We want to be able to use an empirical approach to inform what the CBH is looking for in terms of open science at the intersection of this TOSI Principle 4. And then we will actually take the findings from our local initiative and bring it out to a national endeavor and also an international endeavor. And so we know the 5 TOSI principles, and we know that Principle 4 is really a tension point, and that's really where we are placing our empirical efforts. And I want to thank very much Ari Rotenberg, who's here in front taking copious notes, who's involved in this project as part of his master's thesis in experimental medicine, and Anna Nishatin, who is helping us keep us organized in a very fast-paced project. And so the principles are, as Paul showed, part of a larger international perspective, as shown by UNESCO principles and others on open science. And we really all seem to be moving in that direction, but what shape that takes and what our comfort level is here at UBC is really important. So we very hastily put together a study design. It was first built on the grant that we have from CIHR, but because we wanted to get your perspectives before we heard Guy present to us, we quickly got ethics approval and conducted a series of focus groups and one-on-one interviews with many of you. I'll show you where we're at this point, with the idea of gaining your general perspectives on patents and open science here at the Center for Brain Health, And also because we are neuroethicists, we're very interested in a few philosophical questions that pertain to the special status of brain, if any, in the IP and patent landscape. So we are very grateful to the 29 of you who participated so far in just the past 2 weeks in a series of focus groups and interviews. And what we see here from the brief surveys that we conducted before we went into the qualitative piece, we have people who have some familiarity and expertise with patents, but a much greater, let's see if I can point here. So, right, some medium familiarity with patents, but a much greater familiarity with open science. So that's already an interesting data point for us to understand where we're coming from. And we're sort of in this middle to 41 to 60-year-old age group of people who participated. If we have 29 participants, assume more or less 100 actual members of the CBH, we're looking at about a 25% response rate. That's pretty good in the world that we as neuroethicists operate in. 25% is good. We really want to be capturing upwards of 80% people's participation by the time this year is done. That's really important to us. This is what the focus groups and interviews have looked like so far. We ran some in person and we ran some in Zoom, and we endeavored as best as possible to divide the groups into people who had experience with patents already and those who didn't, because we felt the views would be different. And here are just two quotes from the focus groups. They, of course, are anonymized, and we will keep everything that way. So we see benefits in terms of bringing ideas of patenting, the benefits of patenting, not open science, in terms of commercial development and investment. And we see some of the risks is that it may delay sharing of information and so forth. So we have now probably 30 hours of audio transcripted data that we will now go through. And we will analyze using a variety of methods that we have available to us as qualitative researchers. And what we'll do is we're going to extract major as well as minor themes, and we'll come up with a framework, an initial framework and set of recommendations that we will then feed back to all of you again. Our plan right now is to feed it back in a series of groups and interviews again, separated by those of you who have already participated in the focus groups and those of you who have not participated. And we're not looking for right and wrong, we're looking for resonance. Is what we heard from the focus groups and interpreted, do they resonate with what all of you have said, and where do we need to refine what we've heard, and then implement those as a first set of guidelines. Then we will actually take those and inform the development of a nationwide survey. It's possible, Jeff, that I'm going to come to you, and depending on what the data look like in the next couple of months, maybe we'll want to do a survey protocol rather than more interviews and focus groups. We'll have to see, and we'll see what complements best also the survey that you're launching. So we really want to be nimble. The idea is to do the very best job possible. So I want to thank all of you who have participated so far and for your interest in this project, and to let you know that we're going to move ahead in a very empirical and rigorous way, but one that's very democratic and collaborative, and we're going to make it work. So thanks very much. Paul, back to you.
Yeah, really, it's amazing how quickly Judy got that together. Since we heard that we got the award to support the initiative, and think it was the shovels hit the ground immediately. So I guess one of the things I want to, before I open up for questions, is just to help spread the word about this initiative to your colleagues. We really want as much engagement as possible. We're going to be offering lots of opportunities to give that input, but people should feel free to contact me directly if they have questions or issues they want to ask about. That's fine. If I can't answer them, I'll direct them elsewhere. If you think of something after this event. So we're really good on the schedule. I was hoping we'd have a half hour for discussion, and we actually have more than that available. So I want to open the floor to any comments, questions directed at any of the four of us. And we'll see who can answer. Nobody on? Yeah, Shernaz?
I was wondering about how, maybe to Guy, is how do you enforce this? So the entire institute might be an open science institute, but if one of your members has, discovers something, really wants to go down the IP path, how does this get enforced with a particular person? And then, of course, there are new people who are going to be coming into the center after we develop this particular policy. And and they haven't really kind of been informed, and they might not have signed off on it themselves. So how do you enforce this?
Guy, I think you're muted.
Sorry. So for the new people who are recruited, it is part of their employment contract. It is that they will, follow the open science principles. So that's easier. For the others, it was really the buy-in process and continued kind of exposure and talking about open science and learning about open science. It's voluntary. So, there is no enforcement. We don't enforce because we can't. In fact, at the University of McGill, we can't enforce. So, and principle 5 is autonomy. So, but what we do is, what happens is that we get, we did the buy-in process, so everybody knows about this, everybody's very aware. But if somebody wants to do something different, usually they contact us, and then we have a discussion, and then we try to see with them, are there alternatives? Are there other ways of doing it that would satisfy the open science principles? And I would say that most of the time, it's they don't need to do the patent. You go see a patent lawyer. Guess what the patent lawyer is going to say? You have to get a patent. But in fact, for many things, it's not necessary to get a patent. You have all kinds of other ways of keeping control, if you want, still while making the information and data available. But we don't enforce. It's voluntary. And it's through education and through repetition and exposure to the open science principles. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, go ahead, Shanaz. Yes,
if I can have a follow-up as well, I just want to know what McGill themselves think about it, because in theory, McGill has, stands to lose potentially financial gain because of this open science thing. And are they also nervous because you are talking about, collaborations with industry that has gone up without protecting, say, the intellectual property of your members? And does that worry McGill at all, or are they completely also bought into this?
That's a very complicated question. So we are a unit of McGill, and so McGill is the boss, that's for sure. When we embarked on this whole open science journey, there was huge skepticism at McGill, at the Vice President Research Office, at the Office of Technology Transfer. They actually sent, spies is maybe not the right word, but they sent people to all our meetings and all the conferences and the focus groups to see what was happening. And what ended up happening is that we had an agreement with the VPR's office that they would put it to their external advisory board. So they have an external advisory board that is virtually all business people, venture capital and stuff. And we presented the notion, and the board was unanimous that McGill had to allow this to happen, that open science was the best way forward. And I remember an instance where there was a meeting where there was the president of UBC, the president of Stanford, and the president of McGill University were presenting, how great their universities were. And the first question was, universities are terrible with patents. They protect things. You can never make deals with them. It takes forever. They want too much. They're greedy. Anyhow, it went on and on. And the principal was very happy to talk about the M&I and open science. And the president of Stanford said, we don't really care about intellectual property. We don't make money from the intellectual property. We make money from helping people develop their companies or develop what they've created in their know-how and then they give back. And in fact, if you look at what's happened at McGill, that too, they don't generate very much money. They've never generated very much money from the patents and stuff. So they're worried about something that for which there's no data to support that it's going to happen. But if you look at philanthropy, I mean, Biochem Pharma, McGill was, saying, oh, we didn't get anything out of that, but in fact, they got a big donation, and there's a building called the Bellini Building was paid for by Biochem Pharma. So I think it's a false hope, this thing of that they're going to make a lot of money. I think it's there are very few instances of where this actually works, and it's the dream of the windfall is what it is. And of course, there are some examples of windfall. There's a Gatorade that was invented 20 years ago. There's Pablum that was invented, I don't know, 40 years ago or 50 years ago. And there's others in the biomedical field I'm talking about, but there are not many. If you look at the total income of all licensing and patents in Canada, this was a study done a few years ago, it's about $70 million. And if you look at the cost of the technology transfer offices across Canada, it's about $70 million. So basically, all we're doing is encouraging, giving jobs to lawyers and people who monitor intellectual property and do licensing, but it doesn't really generate any money for the university. It's like an even thing, but what it does is it creates tons of barriers to collaboration. It slows down collaboration, prevents some collaborations, it prevents partnerships. So we've done very well with partnerships. And, anyhow, I guess I've said enough.
Thanks, Guy. We have a question from Gurm online.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Hi, Gurm.
Hi. This question's for Guy. Guy, in your journey of open science at McGill, did you face any challenges with patient consent and ethics, especially for projects that are already in flight in terms of sharing or expanding the data set, or potentially linking to other data sets that might be available in the ecosystem? And more importantly, do you have any advice in this domain?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. So there were existing, biobanks or banks and things in the neuro, and it was not possible to retrofit them into CBIG because, you had to go back and consent the patients. Sometimes they had died, sometimes they had lost. It was complicated. So we started from scratch. Okay, so we never figured out a way to be able to include other things. Okay, that's the bottom line. And we needed to have a very robust ethical framework to be able to do this. We had a first ethical framework that took like a year and a half or 2 years to come up with a governance and with all the various components to be certain that it fits the highest ethical standards and data protection and protection of patients and privacy and so on and so forth. And now we're on version 2, which includes children and has broadened things. And we have in the ethics permission to share all data and no names, okay, no names or identifying information. But we do tell the patients that we cannot prevent somebody from being able to identify you if there's a lot of genetic data, for example, that goes out there, and patients consent and they agree that that is an acceptable risk to them, and we have about 95% of patients agree to be part of this. We also include patients in the governance. We include patients at all the different steps, and they bring their perspective, and their perspective is one of altruism. Okay, they're altruistic. They do not expect any benefit, but what they want is they want to do something to be able to advance knowledge and maybe help others who have their horrible disease. And eventually maybe, even them if it happens quick enough, but that's not really the motivation. The motivation is really, they want to participate in research. I once gave a conference at an ethics conference. I don't know why I was invited. The title of my conference was The Unethical Behavior of Ethics Committees. And essentially, what I meant there was that ethics committees did not take in consideration what patients wanted and what patients needed. And I think that now they do much more. There's a lot more patient participation. And I think that's a very positive thing for a lot of reasons. So my advice is, work with your ethics committee. And everything that we've done is all openly available. And, the government's framework and everything is all available. And you can copy it or propose it to your ethics committee, who then, will look at it and make some kind of modifications or not. I don't know. But that would be the way to go. That would be the easiest way forward, is just to take what we've done and then do the process for your ethics committee. There's Seti Boromand has her hand up, I think.
Hi, thank you. Well, I have a question. I had actually a couple of questions. One of them was partly answered about the sensitive information, that how we're going to share that. And the other one in CBIG, are the research, what is the level of commitment for the researchers? Are they going to be selective? Can they select what they're contributing to this platform, or it has to be all?
Well, I'm not sure I entirely understand, but let me just say how it works. Maybe that'll answer your question. So researchers, the biobank, it's a biobank, and so it's a bank. And so ethics is for banking, and the consent is for banking. If anybody wants to use information or biomaterials from the bank, they need to apply to their local ethics committee to have permission to be able to do that work with human material and human information. Okay, so it's a two-step ethics thing. One is the bank, and then the second one is the specific project. So they need to show that, and then if it is data, okay, it's the proposal is looked at to see if it makes sense, and then the data is released. Okay, and so there are no restrictions. We do ask that they return the data, that they return the data that they generate on the patients, on the subjects, back to enrich the biobank. We don't make it an absolute requirement, because then that would be too restrictive, but we strongly encourage it. Also, for biomaterials, that's another group, another committee that looks at the request for the biomaterials. And there, it's the same question, they need to have ethics to be able to do it from their local institution. And then they ask for the biomaterials. Some biomaterials have infinite, DNA. We have cell lines, we can make more DNA, so that's easy. The cell lines are easy. Brain is maybe a little more restrictive because you don't have tons of CSF. So depending on what they ask for, it's freely available, or there's an assessment of, is this a reasonable project? If they're going to use CSF, 1 mil of CSF and we have 2, it's a limited resource. And then they're also strongly encouraged to deposit the information back. Most researchers and most companies as well have all agreed to deposit the data to enrich the data set of CBIG. And it is happening. So I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much. That's exactly.
I had a little bit of a follow-up from that. I think maybe was part of the question was about whether researchers can buy in to be open, but only for certain projects. That's something that's come up several times locally already. I wondered, Guy, if you had a comment on that.
Well, I mean, it's really simple. There's the principle 5 of autonomy. So, we do not enforce or force people. So if they want to adopt open for many things, but some things they don't want to, I mean, there's nothing we can do, and we don't do anything other than speak to them and try to understand and try to convince them. But from the beginning, it was clear that we were not going to have any sticks, and we were not going to, if they didn't follow the principles, there would be no negative impact on them or their careers. So the way we deal with it is through trying to convince them in education. We do not have any kind of enforcing.
Thanks. Jason?
Thanks for all this. It's really exciting to see this type of movement spread throughout Canada. I don't have much experience with patents, or hopefully soon I'll have more experience with big data. But anyway, what I do have experience with, and what I think all of us have experience with, is reading papers and publishing papers. And one thing I've thought about over the years is it's just what sort of I don't know how messed up the whole publication and access to science system is. About a year ago, I taught a journal club course for Baha'i students in Iran. And these are students that can't access university because of their religious beliefs. And every single article they chose was open access. It was from journals they could get their hands on. All the journals, all the articles that when people here present impactful studies and they're, in meetings, were not on their radar at all because they can't even access them. So it's a whole different world. And you just see how many people can't access the papers that are out there that we publish. And of course, this seems wrong because taxpayers are paying for this. The journals sell it back to us. We work for the journals by reviewing the articles, and they still sell it back to us. And then most of the people in the world can't even read it. So it seems like we have a moral obligation to make our work even the lay, maybe not the data, but just even just the papers available for others. And I think there's a lot of still exciting work to do here because when I could easily spend $20,000 a year in publishing papers, and then with that money I could support a student or do all sorts of extra research, and there are emerging other journals in math, and there is one in neuroscience, but it's aimed at computational neuroscience, where for free you can publish in these journals. They're archive overlay journals. There's minimal costs associated with hosting and whatnot, and they have good editorial boards, and I think there is support for this type of thing. I have this sort of a vision that there's an appetite for this in neuroscience more broadly. And I guess I wonder what in this space, what opportunity is there for dissemination of our findings in terms of, the papers and whatnot.
So I know the Neuro has done some things about that. Guy, you want to comment?
Well, it's a very good point. And in fact, you're entirely right. The research is paid for by society, by taxes or donors. And the work is done by people who are paid for by the public system. And it's sent to journals who then have researchers freely review them. And then they make millions and billions of dollars reselling it to everybody. So it's an unbelievable scam that has to end. We did have an open publishing project, which in fact worked well, but I think the solution are the preprint servers. I think that everything should go onto preprint servers, and preprint servers then are available to everybody. It's not the same as the journal, but usually it's very, very similar, and so I think preprints are going to be the way that at least in the short term, information and results will be made available. Ultimately, these things have to disappear. I mean, these journals have to basically adhere to completely open access from day one and make everything freely available. They won't make money, so they're going to try to make money else another way, but they're being forced, and they're being forced by the donors, they're being forced by the governments, and that's where we're going. The real problem, I think, is the incentivization mechanisms of researchers. So, I mean, researchers want to publish in high impact journals because it is good for their careers and it helps them get jobs. And doing something in the open, and creating large databases doesn't get you these papers and is not very well acknowledged. So we also have to work on the promotions and the evaluation of researchers that do not put such strong emphasis on these journals, because they remain viable because they are put in a way that is important for somebody's career. So if you want, I know some places they don't hire people if they don't have a Nature or a Science paper. It doesn't mean that they're better researchers, and that's not a good way to measure. And we're doing a trial now of how to measure activity or measure excellence in research, which has less emphasis on the impact of the journals and more emphasis on the overall impact to science. So to include data papers or resources and things like that, which are undervalued in promotion. So I completely agree with you. Preprint servers are, I think, a godsend, and we need to break down these companies have to stop doing this. So
Thanks. Definitely passive publication, dissemination at that end are going to be part of what we're going to be working on. I think at the very least, it's a sort of low effort to encourage people to use preprint servers to deposit their work. So yeah, that's something we'll be exploring for sure. Any opinions, questions? Oh, Judy?
So I have a question about benchmarks. So, I think we all, let me take this off. We all know that we're moving in an open science way. We know the publication process is abhorrent. We love having neuroscientists like you, Guy, at ethics meetings. But how do we, as a CBH, determine whether we've really become an open science institute? And how has the MNI and Hotchkiss and maybe how have Western indicated that they're on board with the nuances that we all might bring to the table? What's the benchmark for saying, yep, we've crossed the line into open science, or in fact, we haven't?
Yeah, so that's a very difficult question to answer. The fact is that when we first conceived of TOSI, we engaged, we didn't pay them, but we tried to get involvement of social scientists to be able to study what it is that we are doing and what is the impact and is it working or is it not working? But in the end, a few social scientists were kind of interested, but there wasn't really a lot of uptake. I'm a molecular biology, bind and grind person. So, social science research is not something I know how to do. But there are people who know how to do it. And I wish there were more who were interested in what we were doing. There was an exercise by Richard Gold, the lawyer who's interested in patents, to set up what would be benchmarks or things to measure, and he had a number of different conferences and produced some papers, but in the concrete, it's not been very easy to do. So we are very, very conscious that you need to measure, and what we wanted to do was to show that it works. And I guess we have there are other slides that I have about lessons learned, or we have the list of the worries that people had prior to adopting open science. And then we can see that they all turned out to be needless worries, if you wish. There was, I mentioned one about recruiting young scientists, not a problem. There was one about not being able to make contracts with industry because they were worried about intellectual property, that industry would want to maintain intellectual property. That's not happened, it's the inverse. and so on and so forth. So those are things that we've done. We are also, looking at we have open science based spin-off companies now. We have one that's been created, and we have another that's going to be created soon. So that could be another measure, I guess, of jobs created and such. But I would think if you guys can figure out ways of doing this. I think that's the other thing I didn't mention is that the more people who are involved in this open science journey, the more there'll be different ideas and perspectives. And so you guys are doing this in a very serious and comprehensive way, and you're going to come up with things that we didn't think about, and you're going to maybe you'll come up with metrics that we didn't think about, and I think that's the strength in numbers. And already the Hotchkiss had things that we hadn't thought about. There's another one that we've been engaged with, which is the Baycrest, who came up with some very interesting ideas that we hadn't thought about. So I think the more people who are working on this, the more we'll be able to identify maybe metrics that can be to look for success. I would say one metric could be the number of institutions who adopt open science in Canada, and I think that could be one metric. Another could be how many open science projects have appeared in part through the Neuro or from what we've done. And there are some, there's CONP, which is very close to the Neuro. There's the Canadian Open Parkinson's Network. There's the ALS initiative, and a lot of these things are spinning out. So maybe you're right. We need to do better measurements, but I wish there was somebody who knew how to do these things. Yeah, that got interested.
We may be able to provide some support there, Guy, here on the UBC side. So we can talk about that further.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. I mean, the strength in numbers, the more we are, we're going to be much stronger together.
Anyone online? So I have, I think you brought this up today, Guy, and I've heard you say it before that that philanthropic donors sort of assume that science is open, and they're startled to find out that it isn't. And I think one of the possibly might be an unexpected positive of this is that donors might be more interested. And right now, the center is actually actively working on trying to cultivate donors. And I don't know if you wanted to maybe expand on that a little bit, and how the perception of the center might be positively impacted by having an open science stance.
I mean, they're all individual kind of instances. Tannenbaum gave us $20 million. We've got somebody gave us half a million for the prize. There's one individual who we've been talking to, wasn't sure. We explained open science. He said, yes, this I want to support. I think he's given us like 4 or 5 million so far. This is for Parkinson's research. The Mowafaghian Foundation that you know about actually got very excited about an open science project at the Neuro and has funded us for this. So I can tell you they're really interested in open science. And so I think, it's if you talk about sharing, they get it. And there's somebody on our board, actually, on the board of TOSI, who's a very successful business person in informatics, strong believer in open science. He already supports things at UBC. I think he would be very interested in supporting something at UBC. So I think donors, donors, of course, they all have their things that are interested in, but the open science twist is something that generally they like. I mean, I have had occasional pushback, by business people who they worry about China stealing all our data. So I tell them that we want China to steal our data because we're giving it out freely. And we want everybody to use our data. So what do we care about China? But there's still all these fears going around. But donors, they like it, and disease associations as well. And funders as well. There's the Open Science Funders Association in the U.S. Well, it's not just the U.S. They give out, I think, $8 billion a year. It includes the Gates and the Wellcome, and includes all the big foundations. Yes, they're very pro open science. So the open science does attract some attention.
Thanks. Any more? Anyone have an opinion or to share on what they think about this initiative? All right. Tim.
Yeah, I guess a question for Guy. Well, first, nice presentation, and we're really sold on the concept. I guess in the future, the tri-councils are going to be requiring more sort of transparency around data, and I think sharing of data is going to be part of it. So I'm just wondering how the neuro is kind of positioning for that. And I mean, we've been talking a lot about open data here, but it's just getting people to go the extra mile to kind of prepare their data set upon submission is, sometimes challenging.
So open science is not free science. I was in Europe. It was the European Commission, and they had for Horizon 2020, and they gave out billions and billions of euros. They had a requirement that people make all their data open. And so they did an audit, I think, of 1,000 projects. And out of the 1,000 projects, there's not a single one who made the data available. And when they looked, it's because they don't have the infrastructure, or they don't have the money because it costs money. And so you can't, the tri-councils, I spoke with, like last week, there was a meeting with the tri-council and stuff talking about open science. And my point was that you cannot tell researchers, make everything open and not give them the tools and not give them the money to be able to do it, because it costs money, it takes work, and it takes infrastructure. And the infrastructure can be like a biobank, like we have the CBIG. It can be, or EDU for sending cell lines or assay information, or it can be various databases. And there's multimodal data. I mean, there's all kinds of imaging data, and it's not all the same. There's all kinds of EEG data, there's clinical data, all kinds of data, and we need ways of being able to. We need the tools to be able to make it available, and we need to give money to the researchers. We at the Neuro, we thought we'd make a great, we would do a symbolic thing, and we would pay for all the open access fees for the papers at the Neuro. It would have cost us $500,000. Not a very good use of money, not a very good use of money of anybody. But the researchers are told you have to make your publications open access, but they don't give them any money. So, and it can be very expensive. So I think that the Tri-Council has to put their money where their mouth is, and they have to be able to support either through infrastructure or through and through funding, so that researchers can actually make their data freely available. It is not easy to make data freely available. It's not. It depends on the data, but it is not easy. It takes money.
Yeah, I hear you on the cost issue. One thing, just I guess following up on what Jason said and what you've been saying about the open access fees, there is this PubMed Canada that I've used, and I don't know how well used that is, but there's a yeah, it's like a PubMed, but it's a Canadian one. It has like a maple leaf on it.
It's dead. It's dead.
It's dead now?
Yeah. Okay. The
I hope my paper is still accessible.
Yeah. Well, if you got in before they closed, you're okay. But I remember when they announced they were going to close it, we were not very happy because we thought that was a very good mechanism to make things, more open access. And what I was told by the then director of the CIHR, which was the interim director, I forget his name, but basically it was that it was an informatics problem, and it would have taken a huge effort and then a lot of money from the federal government to convert, and that it wasn't being used very much, so they decided that it was not a good use of money. So PubMed Canada doesn't work. I think these preprint servers, I love them. I think that they become so predominant that it doesn't hamper being able to publish after. I should just mention one last thing about that is that the Gates Foundation, they force you to pay open access, and you're not allowed to publish in journals that do not allow open access. So you can't publish in Nature with Gates money. But if you publish in some other journal and you pay the open access fees, the Gates tops it up. So if it costs $3,000 US, they give you $3,000 US to pay for that. So they have a separate budget line to pay for the cost of open access. So I think that's a good way to go, until which time everything is open access, which is the better solution.
Yeah, I hope that tri-agencies are looking at that as a model for letting people include open access as a line in their budgets. So we're just coming to the end of the time. So I want to thank Guy again for participating by long distance and answering questions. So let's thank everyone.
Thank you. Yeah.
And watch the space. You'll be hearing from us soon. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.